This is an opportunity for me to talk for 20 minutes about the mental health of young Australians, and I've worked now for a staggering 29 years as a psychologist, and just to put that in context, that meant that Maggie Thatcher, Bob Hawke and Ronnie Reagan were all in power when I started. It's always been very easy for me to justify why I chose to work with adolescents because, as you may know, 75% of all the psychological problems in human beings actually begin before the age of 24. And I remember being told this at university and thinking, that would be really good to get quite expert in working with that particular population. The grim reality, however, is that in my line of business, each year in Australia, some 300 young people will in fact take their own lives. And I'd like to start today by telling you the story of one of these young people, because I think it illustrates many of the problems that parents face in trying to determine A, whether there's a problem, and B, what to do about it. I'd like to tell you about a young woman I'll call Hannah. She was the third of 5 children and was just about to commence year 12 in a Victorian secondary school. Photo albums show that she grew up in a really very loving family. She enjoyed a happy childhood and adolescence, and even though she was impacted upon a little bit by the challenging fact that she had an autistic older brother whom she loved and who was very difficult, she managed to enjoy almost every facet of life imaginable. She loved singing, playing the piano, making cards, writing stories, and she was a vociferous writer of diaries and journals. She loved reading, exercise, hiking, cross-country running, table tennis and swimming. She had simple tastes. She loved her collection of coloured texters, her beach volleyball and her CD player. Regarding clothes, she wrote once, "Clothes must let you jump and run." Her favourite top was a T-shirt from World Vision with the words, "Stirring the World." As a big sister, she shared her time equally with all her siblings, listening and singing along to music and having heart-to-heart chats with her younger sister, discussing school and homework with her brothers, and playing sports and games. She shared with her family a deep spiritual faith. She attended evening youth services at her local church, and she taught and helped children at Sunday school, was an active member of the local youth group, where she occasionally played piano for the pop rock band. She earned extra money by babysitting and working part-time at Subway. She was really very ordinary. She just loved going to movies and parties and zipping off to the beach with friends. And here is the puzzle. She appears to have had a solid base of warmth, friendship and love, all of which should have been a potent and positive amulet, a countervailing force against future unhappiness. But all of this unravelled, and eventually she slipped her psychological moorings and succumbed to a savage, lacerating depression. It is only, in fact, through her diary, which she kept completely private and was not even known of by her parents until after her death, that one gets clues as to what might have been going on inside her head. Reading between the lines, and her parents very kindly gave me the diary when I was asked to write the psychological autopsy on this young woman. But reading between the lines, her diary entries, particularly in the last months of life, strongly suggest to me that her mind, which had for years seemed very sharp and clear, like a savage black dog, simply turned on her. The irony, of course, is that she told no one and maintained this incredible mask. It must have been a Herculean effort to maintain this outwardly brave face, because when you actually read what she wrote, it's clear she had reached a point where she no longer found anything in life remotely interesting or enjoyable or worthwhile. Everything that was once sparkling in her life had now become flat, dull, and she was incapable of concentrated thought. Reading through her diary, she seemed to be engaged in an absolutely private, cognitive mortal combat. It seems as if every thought, word, and movement had become a terrible effort. The battle was waged exclusively in the corridors of her mind, where she was progressively besieged by a barrage of increasingly automatic negative thoughts that plagued her with guilt and bid her regard herself and much of her life as worthless, dull, and boring. Towards the end, it appears as though her depressive brain did little more than torment her with a dreary litany of her inadequacies and shortcomings in character, and taunted her with the desperate hopelessness of it all. So what did she do? How did she react? Well, it seems to me that she mounted a brave but ultimately futile rearguard action against her illness. She wrote list after list after list of things to do. She forced herself to exercise and by sheer willpower tried simply to wish the disease away. But the morbidity of her mind was astonishing, and without the reinforcements afforded by antidepressant medication, cognitive behavioural therapy, interpersonal therapy, mindfulness meditation, she could not overcome the power of the negative thoughts. I will never know at which point in her diary her mind capitulated and the thoughts of death and its kin became her constant companions, but clearly that did happen. It was a losing battle, and in the final few days, her frenetic writings suggest that the illness had completely distorted her own perception, not only of herself, her beauty, the size of the tasks that she had, and the issues that she had to tackle. To put it simply, her mind was skating on thin ice and her emotions had become completely frayed. Yet, and here is the rub, she gave few outward signs to anyone, not her family, not her friends, not her siblings. She occasionally complained to her parents about feeling sad and tired, which is hardly unusual for a 17-year-old girl. In the final moments, it seems likely that when faced with yet another challenge, which was essentially starting Year 12 and tackling the VCE, she was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. She was unable to draw down the positive reinforcements that she had so meticulously built for herself and was left in her own thinking without any options but to end her life. In those of my clients that have survived this terrible time, many say that in the end, their brains simply slowed down and burnt out to the point of being useless, and they feel as though only dying would release them from the unbearable misery and overwhelming sense of inadequacy and blackness that surrounds them. In essence, they become prisoners, trapped in a cell of isolation, alienation, hopelessness, and despair. I am reminded of a young woman who I met at the Children's Hospital some years ago who had remarkably thrown herself off the Westgate Bridge and survived. She'd broken every bone in her body from her waist down, and I remember meeting with her And the question I had longed to ask so many of these people was, well, what were you thinking just before you jumped? And she looked me dead in the eye and said, I thought I would never see, hear or know anything ever again. You see, for them, they see suicide as a problem-solving device. If I'm not here, my problems aren't here. Now, clearly, if you're a rational person and your mind isn't tormented by depression, you're going to perhaps think, well, maybe I could pick up the telephone and talk to Kids Helpline, or maybe I could talk to a trusted adult or a psychologist. Most people, sadly, who kill themselves, particularly in this age group, have depression, usually unrecognised and undiagnosed. And I guess where we've tried through Beyond Blue and many other organisations is to get the message through to young people that this is an illness. Chemicals in the brain which regulate how one thinks, feels and behave simply get out of balance. No amount of love and caring or trying to build up their self-esteem can alter their misperception that their situation is simply hopeless. We know that if we can diagnose and treat young people early, we can save them years and in sometimes a lifetime of unhappiness. We can reduce the likelihood of them self-medicating with alcohol or other drugs, along with the myriad academic, relationship and legal problems that can accompany such a diagnosis. Yet despite all of the work done by health promotion experts over the last few decades, the unpalatable truth is that recognition of mental health problems in young people is still unacceptably low, not just by the schools and the parents, but by their peers as well. It's estimated that about 30% of young people who have a psychological problem will actually get around to seeking help for it. And about 50% of the young people with the most serious psychological problems will in fact never seek help. This may in part be due to us having an ostrich mentality, where we notice something strange about teenagers, but out of ignorance or fear decide to ignore it in the hope that it'll go away, or dismiss it in time-honoured tradition as just a phase typical of those adolescents. The longer this behaviour is ignored, of course, the more hardwired and complex the underlying behaviour becomes, and the harder it is to treat. This, of course, is compounded by the fact that unlike physical ailments, mental illness have few visible physical symptoms, and due to a combination of stigma, ignorance and prejudice, it's so much harder for people to accept them still today in 2013 as a genuine illness. Yet the good news, often overlooked in discussions of adolescent mental health, is that the vast majority of young people, and estimates vary between 60 and 70%, do actually manage to get through their adolescent years without any major problem. They may slam doors, they may sulk for hours, they may occasionally tell their parents to go forth and get multiplied, but much of this is pretty much par for the course for a teenager. When it comes to young people, knowing the difference between warning signs and normal behaviour is not always easy. Yet as parents and carers of young people, we are all ultimately responsible for the health and well-being of this next generation. Despite their foot-stamping claims to the contrary, many are not able to accurately assess their own mental health, and they're certainly not seeking treatment. The distinguished and now deceased Melbourne psychologist John Cheetham once told me there is no such thing as a perfect parent. But even so, I believe my task and the task of my colleagues in psychology is to help parents learn to be better at parenting. My aim in all my writings is to increase the emotional literacy of mums and dads and adult carers, and to explain to them what they can do when their teenagers do, in fact, lose their psychological moorings. So after 29 years of clinical work, the question is, what does one look for? I'd like to tell you about 8 key signs which I believe are often overlooked and misunderstood. The first of which is if you have a young person who has long-standing feelings of unhappiness, moodiness, and in particular irritability, accompanied perhaps by a sense of emptiness and numbness, and that is present for at least 2 to 3 weeks continuously with all of these other symptoms, then I think it is more than just adolescence. I think it is deserving of a diagnosis, and it's deserving of assessment. The second component is if a young person who formerly enjoyed life suddenly loses interest and pleasure in activities that once really gave them a wonderful feeling. Thirdly, a loss of appetite or weight, or in fact, particularly for girls, overeating, where they seek to manage their mood with food. Fourthly, and this is terribly difficult, when they can't sleep. And we know that adolescents generically are the most sleep-deprived segment of the population. But with depressed teenagers, you find they spend hours trying to fall asleep, wake frequently during the night, and in fact often get stuck in a pattern of early morning waking, where they awake at 4 or 5, but are ironically too tired to fall asleep again. And of course, we also have a phenomenon known as hypersomnia, where they're so depressed and miserable they don't get up and they literally sleep all day. On top of that, there are 3 more signs to look for: feeling bad, worthlessness or guilt, the self-critical, self-blaming type of behaviour that we saw in Hannah's writings. 7th, the difficulty concentrating or making decisions. Now, you might say that's kind of par for the course for young people as well. Well, might well be, but not if they have all of these other symptoms as well. And lastly, a preoccupation and obsession with dark and gloomy thoughts that include suicide. The question, of course, is why is it now that 1 in 4 of our secondary school students have this terrible diagnosis? Why is it that 1 in 7 of our primary school kids have such a diagnosis? And of course, there's no easy answer. Some argue that our young people are in a catastrophic state of crisis because of the toxic influences of advertising, celebrity, the internet, pornography, all of which pressurise them to grow up too soon. There can be no doubt that our childhood is nothing like theirs. To put it really bluntly, our 18 is their 14. Our 14 is their 10. Never before in my career has growing up been under such sustained assault, ranging from everything from diet ads, alcohol marketing and fashion pressures to the inroads of bullying via social media, all sowing the seeds of body hatred. Little girls and little boys did not grow up hating their bodies. They did not grow up hating the world. But we're noticing now that even at primary school, and I think there's no mystery about what's causing it, the pressures are clear. Corporations around the world have realised they can sell to young people and pre-teens, and they've given them the message that your looks are the most important thing about you. So when you look for the reasons why we've seen this sudden and marked plunge in young people's mental health, why we see the anxiety, the eating disorders and the self-harm, which once had been extremely rare, now happening in every classroom and every street, perhaps you'll understand why I believe we need to go back to the parents. That is our job to equip them with the skills and the knowledge and the strategies so that they can become the world experts in their sons and daughters and intervene early. Thank you very much.